I'm Rick from Car Enthusiast Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Nova. And on this video, hopefully at the end of the video, this car will be sitting on 4 wheels and tires with rear suspension in the car and the front suspension also bolted in. We are hopefully going to remove it from the frame jig on this video and just take this car to the next step. Right now you can see the whole back end, if you watch previous videos on this car, has been completely welded up. The front end is welded up. The gaps are obviously not perfect, but we do not want to gap the car until we remove it from the frame jig, relieve any tension, and get it where it's going to ride on the wheels and tires. Off camera on this Nova, I did make a transmission tunnel for this car. This car has an LS motor in it, and we did test fit that on a previous video, and the TR660 6-speed transmission. So obviously this Nova would came if it was a manual, like a Saginaw transmission in it, or like a Muncie, I think some of the Novas had in them. But what we had to do, since the 6-speed is so much larger, it wouldn't fit under the factory trans tunnel for the 69 Nova. So what I did, we initially cut out the hole on a previous video just to get the engine, transmission, driveline, angles and everything set. And off camera, since everything was custom, I just kind of bent up some sheet metal. We used 17 gauge, put some angles on it, and then built one piece at a time for our clearance. We also made the center top cross member mount from, basically I took the transmission mount, turned it upside down and modified it so it kind of flowed a little better. I will say there is still some clearance issues I want to do and tighten up underneath. I kind of just wanted to build everything from the top. I'll make some notes on it, really dial in the clearance issues underneath down the road. Also, we are not going to grind out on this transmission tunnel or finish it out until the drive line comes down the car. So that's also going to be after we pull the motor. We'll have the whole front sheet metal pulled. We'll have the whole car pretty much gapped, and then we'll start prepping the panels for epoxy primer, stripping down all the E-coat, and with the motor transmission out, we'll finish the center hump and everything else. This is just going to be a more efficient way to do it. So if you're watching this car and you see, you know, random weld marks on the floor from here on out on the videos, just know we are going to clean all that up. The job is not done. We're just waiting for the right moment to do that. So like I said, that's one thing we've done off camera. We are going to hopefully be able to set the drive line in this car, maybe get an angle measurement. The owner might send the drive shaft just to make sure everything else is right. We'll bolt in the front suspension. And one other thing we did do off camera, the owner sent Ridetech subframe, the bolt-in subframe connectors. And he actually also bought the the Detriot Speed Engineering doubler plate. So they're plates that come in right here in the pockets where you weld them on the torque boxes, I guess you would call them, on a Nova, on the floor pans above them, and they bolt into the spring mount. So if you've seen, I've done a video detailed on the 70 Nova we built on how to install these with a step-by-step. Go check them out. They really do increase the strength. And actually the owner saw that video and realized that he wanted these bolt-in doubler plates, you know, strengthening shackle mounts in the front of his car too. So what we did, like I said, this was off camera since I've never done it before. We basically combined the Ridetech bolt-in subframe connectors and we welded them into the sections of the doubler plates that are removable. So now instead of having the Ridetech where it's got a few bolts in the front and, you know, 3 bolts, 4 bolts in the back, now we have what, 8, 9, we have like 12 bolts in the back that from the doubler plate kit, and then the same bolts in the front. Now, saying that these are going to stay as bolt-in subframe connectors, because now to get the rear lower mounts out, you are going to have to unbolt them, and that's fine. This is, you know, what the owner wants. It's all personal preference. I think the bolting subframe connectors and how they're done will be more than sufficient enough for what the owner wants to do with this car. I will say the subframe connectors, the bolts in the front, are not done yet in the side of the subframe. We do have to drill those, but my jig points right here are still in the way. So same thing with the rear suspension. We'll put both the front suspension on the car while it's on the jig, since nothing is in the way up here. But as far as the rear suspension, I got a couple mounts right in the middle of where the whole subframe assembly for the rear suspension, the 4-link, is gonna go. So like I said, front suspension will be bolted on. We'll get this car rolled over to the jig, and then we'll work on the rear suspension on the lift. So, and then I'll actually show you in how the Ridetech subframe connectors bolt in with the doubler plates. And if you're just using the Ridetech subframe connectors, just be aware they only use 3 bolts in the factory location instead of, you know, all the bolts we're adding on the doubler plates, but they still install the front the same exact way. So that about wraps up the intro on this car and what our plan is. Like I said, a lot of this should be bolt-in parts. You know how bolt-in parts go. There seems like there's always some modifications we need to make for the variances in the car. And that's not knocking anyone's quality of product. It's just there are variances in all these cars. We see them all the time in the shop, factory cars, factory paints, and there's tolerance things. We'll actually take one subframe out of a car, bolt another one in, and then realize there's a tolerance difference there. So like I said, it's just part of the game. That's why I do sometimes like the custom weld in stuff, that they know, hey, you're gonna weld it in, and the tolerances are usually a little bit more forgiving, or we can grind and measure some stuff where, well, like I said, we'll see how it goes. Let's get to doing some work on this car. Let's bolt into suspension. We'll do a voiceover on, you know, some of the parts we're using, and just the general idea of, you know, doing a bolting kit, a Ridetech, which we've done in other videos, the Detriot Speed full Quattro-link kit. So stay tuned, let's get working.
So I'm going to quickly walk you through the front suspension, as it's literally just putting bolts in and following the directions. Same thing when we get to the rear Ridetech 4-link, the bolt-in parts of that suspension. A lot of that we're going to just go through really quick and show the highlights on it. So the front suspension that we are installing on this car is Global West. That's going to be the lower control arms, the upper control arms, and their whole kit right there. So the first thing like we end up doing is, like I said, bolting on the lower control arms. We are going to put the upper control arms. These arms are supposed to help with camber, caster, and handling characteristics. You could see on a previous video we've done in this Nova, we've also put the rack and pinion setup from Flaming River. So this whole car, it's been a good thing, but it's been a mixture of all kind of different parts and products. The good thing about that is the owner got to choose exactly once on every part, and what he likes about certain companies and their kits, and what he doesn't like about certain companies and kits. The bad thing is clearance, interferences, issues, and how all the kits come together. We've had some issues, and it's been some challenging learning curves along the way with that. So as you can see, we're continuing on bolting on the kit on the passenger side now. We'll get the lower control arm in, we'll get the upper control arm in, then we're going to go ahead, once those are bolted in, and we are not set in camber and caster. At this point, this suspension is going on a factory front subframe. There's no need to really dial in the camber caster, so right now it's just get the wheels on the ground and see how everything sits, make sure everything bolts on right now. So the shocks on this car are Viking shocks. That's another brand that we're going to add to the mix. The owner wanted them specifically. So we went and we go put the shocks on. We're going to put the coilovers on the car. And again, this is just making sure we have no issues down the road. We are not doing anything else to the spindles. So what we're going to do, we have the spindles from Global West on there, but with the hubs, and we're not putting any brakes or anything on the front end of this car. That's going to be something the owner's going to tackle down the road. Like I said, we're just making sure the steering bolts up to it, all the front suspension jives together, it turns fine, and everything right there. Now that we got the whole front suspension bolted on in place, we're going to turn our attention to cutting this car off the frame jig itself. So I do tack on my jig points. I don't have bolt-on jig points. And why I do that is it makes it easier between this Nova, another Nova, everything else, that if I do want to change something really quick, I can add a bar, take a bar off real quick, that we don't spend the time making a bolt-on piece to go into one specific frame point pickup location. Now, that's not saying that if you're not building a frame jig in your own house and you want to do that and make your real nice bolt-in frame jig, to us, just using the welded up pieces tacked on in a couple spots and just picking certain points of reference. For instance, where a torque box comes into a frame rail or where a rocker meets a quarter panel. Like I know, because I've done this frame jig and used it so many times, where those pickup points of reference are. I do focus on the rear shackles. Those are very important. And I'll focus on certain pickup points on the front frame rail, I know, just to make sure our wheels are straight and in line. Same thing with the front of this car. I focus on right in front of one of the subframe mounts that I know we can reference off that. So now that the car is completely off the frame jig, you could see we just kind of cut those mounts, lifted it right in the air. It's still on the lift. We'll go ahead and start installing the Ridetech 4-link rear suspension kit. Now, we are going to do this Ridetech kit a little different. Talking with the owner, he did want this Ridetech welded in. He does not want to be a complete bolt-in kit. So what we are going to do, we're drilling all the holes for where the Ridetech would go on the frame rails. We're going to put our rib nuts in there just like the Ridetech would have done or want you to do in their direction. So once we got all the rib nuts in, we'll bolt it in. Now the front mounts go into above the rear seat pan. Those did not match. From what I've heard from other people, a lot of people are cutting them, bending them down, or hammering up the floor pan. So what we decided to do, we cut those off completely. We're going to weld them to the bump stop of the Nova. We're going to weld them all across the whole front end. And like I said, with us welding the rest of this kit on there, the bolts at this point are more for show than anything else. You know, I am going to weld up all the plug holes where Ridetech wants the rib nuts going through the side of it. It just, I feel again that this kit is going to be a lot stronger. The owner doesn't ever plan on taking it out of the car. You could see this kit did come powder coated and looking really nice. Right now it is in the bare metal. We did put it in the sandblast cabinet because we obviously are welding it. Then we sandblasted it to bare metal, and actually right now we added weld through primer on the back side of it too. And same thing with the car. We did prep the whole parts of the Nova with weld through primer after sanding down all the epoxy primer. And what we'll end up doing, just making sure that, you know, we're not burning off epoxy when we're welding, because as we are welding this kit on there, we are going to put a bunch of heat on it. So the first thing we're going to do is take some vice grips. We're going to clamp, make sure everything's tight, and I'm going to go around the whole kit now that everything's bolted in place, and we are going to tack the whole thing in there. What we don't want to start welding and come to find out that it starts pulling with the heat one side out there. So like I said, a couple tacks every couple inches right around the whole kit, making sure all our fitment, our gaps, and everything work really well. This kit needed no shims or anything. There was no space in between the frame rails like they said on, you can add on certain ones of their kit. You could see the front area, now that we cut those pockets where the upper 4 bars are, they're really tight and snug. You could almost see the angle though, how when it's coming straight, it didn't want to match the floor pan. So like I said, a lot of people are denting that area. There's nothing wrong with that. I think welding that solid is going to be better than factory. You could see right now we did do all the plug welds in the rear where the bolts are going to be. We are going to leave the bolts on the rib nuts looking down, and again, they'll just stay there. Won't be a big deal. The rest of the kit will be completely welded in. It's not going to affect any performance because everything that we're going to need to do with the 4 links and everything else, all that can be accessed without taking down the whole top cradle for this 4-link kit. As I continue welding the Ridetech 4-link kit here, I am focused most of my heat and my puddle and concentration on the Ridetech cradle itself, and then what I'm doing, I'm kind of just working the puddle onto the frame rail floor pan area. You know, and what I'm trying to do with this in general, I'm trying to make long consistent runs. You know, sometimes you'll see if we hit a certain area, I feel it's getting too hot, we'll slow it down and do a little bit more constant stitch weld. Obviously everything in here is on time lapse, so it's welding a lot faster than it is. So every time you see it break like that, that's obviously you know, a 1-inch stitch or something like that. Now, saying that, a lot of the welding technique and everything, and it comes down to, you know, your travel speed, your heat settings, and your complete style on how you're welding. So it's one of the things you just got to take some time, figure out what works for you, what works with the welder, and the material you're using. So right here with this, I know I get asked this question all the time. I am using 030 wire on something like this. Usually with the sheet metal thin sheets, plug welds and everything, I switch between 030, 026 wire, 023 wire. Sometimes with the heavier, like if we're building the frame rails or something, or I mean not the frame rails, the frame jigs that for our cars, that's really the only time that I switch to 035. Besides that, my welder, I usually control and fine tune it with the wire speed settings on it. Besides that, 030 stays in the welder the most, just because I can jump around to the suspension stuff and then I could go back to the real thin sheet metal, and it really doesn't affect it. Again, I do a lot of TIG welding on the external sheet metal, so anything I really have to worry about warping is usually done on the TIG welder itself anyway, where I'm just tacking up, and the 030 is fine with that on the sheet metal itself. So turning our attention to, like I said, the bolt-in Ridetech subframe connectors along with the Detriot Speed doubler plates. These 4-link bars on the Ridetech kit would bolt in exactly the same that the factory spring pockets would bolt in the rear. What they're doing, they're replacing the spring pocket with just this whole bolt-in subframe, and you could see how it attaches. What you do in the front, you lower the rear solid body mount. As it drops down the bolt in there, the subframe just goes in it gets sandwiched in there. And then what you're going to do, like I said, we are going to, when it's finally installed, now that the car's off the frame jig, everything else, we'll come back through and we'll drill our holes for our side bolts in the front. So you'll have the body mount bolt there holding the bottom end, and then 4 bolts on the front that brings it in right there. These subframe connectors are really good. The one issue I do have with them that, it's not, again, Ridetech's fault, is they just come so low and everything, because they have to clear the floor pans on all cars and everything else. And the problem with them coming low, now you have issues with, one, you see them out the side of the car, and then 2, your other issues, if you do want to run exhaust or anything else, this is something that the owner was talking about, that the exhaust coming out here might have a hard time trying to fit around these subframe connectors, because everything does drop so low. So you really come into ground clearance issues and everything else with that. Now, saying that, it is nice to be able to take out the whole subframe connectors. It is nice to be able to remove the whole front clip of this Nova if you have to. And like you said, I showed that on previous videos, that the front subframe on this car is in a green etching primer that will go back to sandblasting and will be chassis painted before it leaves the shop. So saying that, we will take full advantage of unbolting those subframe connectors, and more than likely we will go ahead and chassis paint those subframe connectors the same time that we're doing the subframe connector, just so everything matches underneath this Nova, and then it's set where nothing else has to be scratched and everything else. So this is just a mock-up phase of everything. So on the walk around video at the end of it, if you see that there's some parts of that subframe that are bare metal or some slight surface rust here or there because we used a cheap etching primer, not a huge deal. Everything's going to be removed from that again. That front subframe clip still, you'll see if you do see on the walk around video, some of the Flaming River stuff is just tacked in place. That whole front subframe still needs a lot of welding work to be done on it with the stuff that we put in there. So right now, again, just a mock-up phase and anything, get the car on the wheels and tires, try to get all these parts from different companies jiving and working together on the first fitment, and then we'll go ahead and fine-tune everything and work out any other bugs and issues. So now with the Ridetech 4-link, like I said, we're just highlighting it. This is one of the things that the directions on Ridetech is really good. They include pictures on everything we're showing. We're just going to put the Ridetech 4 9-inch housing. So this is a pre-built housing. We didn't do any work on this housing. It came powder coated and everything. So we are going to bolt it up to their 4-link bar. Ridetech also also has in their directions on how to adapt it to their 4-link to the factory housing, whether you have a monoleaf or a multi-leaf system on the back, and how to add the spring purchase for, you know, the factory Nova 10-bolt rear end on there. So if you have one of those, you do not have to buy the 4 9-inch housing. I do recommend the 4 9-inch housing, far superior housing. You could change out the gear set a whole lot easier. You can buy different differentials, and really in the grand scheme of things, they're so popular and so widely used that the cost of them is, you get so much more bang for your buck. I'm not saying it's the strongest rear end out there. You know, obviously everyone loves the Dana 60 in the Mopar world, but if you price a Dana 60 for a 4 9-inch, I mean, comparable to the horsepower, I mean, the 9-inch is about half the value. So again, we are putting the Viking shock coilovers on this car. You can see right now we are just adjusting them, getting everything preloaded. Now with this right here, these shock adapters on this car, I guess I should have read the directions better. They need to go upside down, so flipped over. So that's one thing we'll have to do. Again, in the mock-up phase, I'll just flip them over. It's going to hold the weight of the car, but if you are doing this, make sure you turn them upside down and put your coilovers on the top, bolts go on the bottom. I should have known that when we were tightening, and it made it a little bit more challenging to get to the bolts and everything. So just be aware. Apparently I didn't follow the pictures or directions good enough. We can correct that. People make mistakes all the time. We're not going to edit it out, but so saying that, we'll make sure we turn those around, and we are installing the coilovers on the top. Again, now that everything's welded in, we want to make sure everything does fit, everything, you know, no issues. We're going to cycle the suspension a little bit. We're going to get the car on its wheels and tires. And then this is, like I said earlier, the pre-step to gapping everything, where the car's relaxed, there's no tension in it, and then we can, you know, start our gapping process on everything else. We are also going to go ahead and install the center section. I am not putting the gasket in it. Again, this is a lot of dry fitment on everything else. So the idea is just get the chunk in there. This is a posi unit that we are putting in, and you can really see how nice this whole Ridetech rear suspension is. It's nice knowing that we don't have to do a modification. It saves a lot of time and fabrication work, as we have built rear ends in the past in the shop. We have posted them on Facebook and everything else, and it's really fun. You get a nice custom, full tricked out rear end to every offset spec of your wheels and tires, etc., etc., etc. But it really is time consuming, where right now I know, you know, this is their standard rear end on their standard kit on a car that they install these kits on all the time. So they've done a lot of figuring out on what exactly you need and what works for their setup. So I think it's going to be really good. It's good peace of mind knowing that the wheels are a very good offset, and then the owner should have no issue with this. And like I said, with bolting on this part of the kit, you see how everything does line up on the 4-link. So let's wrap up this video and do some final thoughts on this 1969 Nova.
All right, so we have the 69 Nova on its 4 wheels and tires for now. We will put the orange gunny wheels on there just so it's easier when we're painting in here, sanding in there. We don't have these big wheels holding up the opening. Now, saying that, they're on another Nova that's getting ready to head out. If you saw a couple weeks ago, we did the final gapping on that video. Now, this 69 Nova is right behind that car. You can see we did do the Ridetech suspension on this car. Looking underneath this car, you could really see, I think welding this kit in was the way to go. I think, you know, the bolt-in stuff looks really nice. We did have to change the shock eyelets on the bottom to 1/2 inch. I believe the Viking shocks were 3/8 initially, and it's just a process of mixing and matching different parts. It's kind of, you're going to run into you know, small hurdles along the way. Not a huge deal. The Viking shock sells a 1/2 inch adapter, so that was another week. We just had to wait for that to come in. So it's just small holdups here or there that make these builds extend out a little bit over time. And another reason why, if you see in the shop, we have multiple builds going at once. So I can put this car on the side for the owner for a week. We can wait for the right parts and then move on with the process. So looking at underneath the car, we also did the Ridetech bolt-in subframe connectors. We did finish those. We did, like I said in the beginning of the video, and I showed you pictures of it, we did incorporate them with the Detriot Speed leaf spring front pocket plates. So you could see looking on the inside of the car, those have been welded in. They obviously still need to be DA sanded, epoxy primed on them. We also, like I said initially on the beginning of the video, the transmission tunnel, that is still just in the major fabrication phase. So we're waiting on the next step on removing the engine and everything else to really get in there, clearance it, and just double check all that. But like I said, major step on 4 wheels and tires. We're able to roll the car out. It's off the frame jig, and now we can move on to the next video. So right now, walking around this car, this is what usually in our shop, 68 to 72 Nova usually comes out like without the gapping process started. So we put the panels on the car in a way where they fit as best they can. So you can see even on this trunk area, it gets a little bit tight up top, but the rest of the gap is pretty straight. Same thing along the back of the trunk. Everything's really straight. Now, we also do not have the trunk seal on this car. So we have that already. We will start installing the trunk seal. Same thing with that side. The trunk is really straight, but we will come back through now that the car's on its wheels and tires. We will start tackling the gapping issue. So like I said, we are going to put the trunk seal in the car because that does affect how the trunk sits down and everything. We will have some gapping done on this door. You can see it looks actually pretty decent for these Novas. The other side is worse. We always have on the fender and door, there's some issues up here that we'll also address. Same thing with the hood. We might pull some of these fenders out, fix some of the gap. We will fix some of the gaps up here. Like I said, we're just going to go through the whole car. Once we get it on the gunny wheels, we'll probably start the gapping process on these wheels, but we'll make sure the car's settled down. I'll do it like I did it on 70 Nova, the gapping video, the final video on that one. So we're not going to film a lot of that because it's literally something we just went into pretty good detail, you know, 2 weeks ago, and it's with this car already looking at, it's going to be the same process. We're going to have to work the front trim moldings. We're going to test fit them. These corners usually don't fit. Like I said, we have some hood front fender issues and the other issues I told you about. The rest of the car, as you could see, is also in E-coat, you know, minus the deck filler panel and really the inner structure. So realistically, once we're done with the gapping, we'll start blowing this car apart. We will start, you know, stripping everything else down to bare metal on the bolt-on parts. Once we're done welding on it, we'll start epoxy priming those one at a time, or a section, a group of those at a time in the paint booth, and get those ready for final assembly. Then when the car is all done, the rest of it, we'll do the roof structure, the quarter panels, and the tail panel, which actually the tail panel's already been in epoxy primer, so we do not have to worry about the tail panels, but we will go right up to the tail panel, to the parts that we did get up to. If we do any work on the tail panel, we will DA sand it and epoxy it one more time. We will also test fit the bumpers in this phase, and then you'll see on the next video, we'll do a final bolt together assembly of the whole car. And I mean, we might have one, maybe 2 more videos on this car. This car is real short behind the other Nova, and like I said, I just don't want to repeat a lot of process. So like I said, that's the main reason we're doing a walk around now of how the panels fit when you put them on, and get them as close as you can. So this is what you can expect as I feel a pretty decent fit, man, as far as, you know, compromising everything, getting everything close. The real work comes in on fine tuning them and welding up the gaps. So that's something you do have to expect. I did talk to the owner. He wants this car almost the same as the 70 that went out the door on the previous video content. So that was a pretty straight car. Everything was in line. Gaps look really tight on that one and everything. So this is going to be part of that same process. Obviously this car, this Nova, as you could see, is a different flavor of that. Yes, it's a similar Nova, but this has a completely different drivetrain, suspension, everything else in it. But the body in general is going to come out about the same, minus the Camaro dash that we did on the other one. This one will retain its factory dashboard. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like I said, on the Ridetech, there is something a little different. The Detriot Speed, the Ridetech subframe connectors, I believe that was a really good bolt-on kit that you can do. Obviously adding them to the front leaf spring suspension plates, I think is a little overkill, but that's what the owner wants, and we are able to get that for him. I do gotta say, the Ridetech 4-link kit in the rear, that is not really, I mean, it's a bolting kit, but there obviously, if you do get that kit, I would say be prepared for some cutting and welding. We didn't have to do, we basically just cut off the front tabs on the front. That was the major fabrication or cutting aspect of it. Most people, from what I was hearing and talked to, usually dent the floors underneath the rear seat instead of cutting the brackets itself. I just don't think denting the floor would look as good coming down. So to me, it was easier to cut the brackets, weld them right up. So that wraps it up on this video. If you like this kind of content, please check out our Facebook page, Carthage Classic Cars. We're posting on this car. We got the other projects in the shop behind me, behind closed doors. And please like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I said, we will have another video, at least one more, out on this 69 Nova. We have other projects in the shop, so stay tuned for them. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you next time.